Many Americans live on the outskirts of hope, some because of their poverty and some because of their color, and all too many because of both. Our task is to help replace their despair with opportunity. And this administration today, here and now, declares unconditional war on poverty in America.
B. Johnson and the War on Poverty by Julie Myers. Poverty is a long-standing issue in the United States. However, this issue didn't begin to gain serious recognition until around the 1950s. During this time, many politicians began to realize how big of a concern poverty truly was in America. A majority of these politicians were liberal Democrats, such as Senator Paul H. Douglas of Illinois. Douglas urged legislation to assist areas known as poverty pockets, or areas with great economic depression and people living in poverty. However, many of his efforts were diminished by the Republican administration under President Eisenhower. Many outside of politics noticed the poverty problem as well, such as writer John Kenneth Galbraith with his publication of The Affluent Society, a book that brought attention to the issue and mentioned the stark contrast between the wealthy and the poor of America. This issue of poverty in America was beginning to gain traction because of people like Douglas and Galbraith who were bringing the problem to light. The officially declared war on poverty began with Lyndon B. Johnson during his State of the Union address on January 8, 1964. His specific famous words were, "This administration today, here and now, declares unconditional war on poverty in America. I urge this Congress and all Americans to join with me in that effort. It will not be a short or easy struggle. No single weapon or strategy will suffice, but we shall not rest until that war is won. The richest nation on earth can afford to win it. We cannot afford to lose it." President Johnson's motivation to fight against poverty in America partly comes from his successor, President John F. Kennedy, who also recognized economic disparities in America and aimed to try to amend them. He was also motivated by the fact that nearly 20% of Americans were living in poverty during the time Johnson came into office, which he viewed as a national disgrace and failure on the part of society and government. During his inaugural address on January 20th, 1965, a year after his declaration of war on poverty, Johnson reiterates his ideology by saying, "In a land of great wealth, families must not live in hopeless poverty. In a land rich in harvest, children must not go hungry. In a land of healing miracles, neighbors must not suffer and die unattended. In a land of learning and scholars, young people must be taught to read and write." Additionally, Johnson was motivated by President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal efforts, with legislation such as the Social Security Act of 1935 and other legislation that set a great precedent for government assistance on poverty alleviation. However, Roosevelt's New Deal acts and programs left out certain things, like inclusion for African Americans and affordable health care, which are issues Johnson's administration planned to take on with their war on poverty. Now, the plan was in motion with the war on poverty officially proclaimed, but what did Johnson actually do to fight poverty? The main piece of legislation that put the war against poverty into motion was the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964. Johnson summarizes the main goal of this act when he said during its signing, "Our American answer to poverty is not to make the poor more secure in their poverty, but to reach down and to help them lift themselves out of the ruts of poverty and move with the large majority along the high road of hope and prosperity." Some of the specific initiatives enveloped within the Economic Opportunity Act include the Job Corps to provide job training for young people who are low income and at risk, the Volunteers in Service to America, which provided volunteers the ability to assist poverty through communities, programs, and organizations, and educational initiatives like Head Start, which help children from families in poverty be more successful in public schools. Johnson claimed that all of these programs established through the Economic Opportunity Act would result in savings to the country and especially to the local taxpayers in the cost of crime, welfare, health and police protection. President Johnson wasn't the only one fighting in this war on poverty. Many others contributed to the effort, including his wife, First Lady Lady Bird Johnson. One specific instance of how she was involved was when she visited the Wilkes-Barre and Scranton region of Pennsylvania, which was the location of a poverty pocket and had an unemployment rate that was around double the national average. While there, the First Lady said, "Last Wednesday, I sat in the gallery of Congress and heard my husband declare war on poverty in this country. Today, I felt as if I've been standing on the first battlefield of that war." And the people of Wilkes-Barre and Scranton that heard her speak said that they felt as though she had a real interest in them. This shows how the war on poverty was more than just legislation, but involved the lives of real people who were affected by poverty, and that the Johnsons truly cared about the people that they were helping. In addition to government officials getting involved in the war on poverty efforts, many civilians were taking action as well. Numerous people in cities across the country took to the streets to show their support for a war on poverty and demand that legislation be carried out to effectively help those living in poverty. An example of this is a large-scale demonstration that took place in Chicago over 2 days in April 1964. The large group carried signs with slogans such as "Start the War on Poverty," "End the War on Mankind," and "Our Real Enemy, Poverty." They also draw the connection between the poverty issue in America with civil rights issues, as minorities are more widely affected by poverty. Additionally, they urge legislation on poverty to take funds from the country's military budget, claiming that domestic issues such as poverty should have more support than foreign affairs involving war and the military. Lyndon B. Johnson's efforts during the war on poverty had lasting effects on the nation. He had multiple successes. Notably, the poverty rate did decline from 19.5% in 1963 to 11.1% over the next decade. Another great success came from the Head Start program, founded under the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964. Elizabeth Rose describes the long-lasting effects of the program by saying, "Head Start was born in a time of enormous optimism, both about the possible impact of early intervention on children's development and life trajectories, and about the ability of the federal government to solve deep-seated problems of poverty and inequality. It has long outlived its original parent, the war on poverty, and has established a role in programs for young children as part of the federal government's role of promoting equity and equal opportunity. This explains how specifically successful the Head Start program was and still is to this day, as it provides opportunities for children and helps children living in poverty gain more academic support." However, not all of Johnson's establishments under the war on poverty have been as long-lasting or successful as Head Start. This is in part because of the context surrounding Johnson's presidency. America's involvement in the Vietnam War began to increase, so much of the economic focus went toward the war efforts, and Johnson did not seek re-election in 1968. An example of one program that isn't widely viewed as successful is Medicare. Paul Starr describes its downfalls by saying, "But Medicare and Medicaid have also created severe and lasting problems for both healthcare and government in the United States." So eager were Johnson and other Democratic leaders to placate healthcare interest groups that the financing provisions, particularly for Medicare, sharply inflated medical costs, sowed doubt that a universal program was feasible, and distorted the allocation of public spending for decades to come. There are other lasting issues as well. Although the war on poverty aimed to do what President Roosevelt's New Deal didn't, and include Americans of all races in its problem solving, there is still huge economic inequality. As the poverty rate fell to around 11% a decade after the war on poverty was declared, it remained at around 30% for African Americans, showing that poverty was still disproportionately affecting minorities and people of color. Overall, Lyndon B. Johnson's war on poverty made great efforts toward reducing poverty in America and had lasting effects through successful programs like Head Start. However, there is still much work to do towards the issue of poverty in America. Hopefully, presidents and governments in the future follow Johnson's precedent of intervening and making domestic issues such as poverty a priority to benefit all American people.